Now, all of us are familiar with Jesus' statement about the great commandment, that the first law is that you should love your God with all your heart, soul and mind. The second law is to love your neighbour as yourself. Now, I'm not really sure if the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, was in vogue in Roman times, but there could not be a simpler guide to understanding Jesus' teaching. This morning I'd like to help you to examine what it means to be a neighbour by using imaginative prayer in the Ignation tradition. Let me start by giving you an example of imaginative prayer from personal experience. Some years ago I conducted a self-directed retreat at St Teresa Spirituality Centre at Ormiston in Brisbane. I don't know if you know Santa Teresa or people. Many of you been there? It's a wonderful place. Wonderful place. So I was sitting on a stone block at the bottom of the garden, staring at the sculpture of Our Lady, beside which were two water jugs. The scene represented the wedding feast at Cana. The inscription in John chapter 2, verse 5 read, "Do whatever he tells you." I decided to place myself within the scene of the wedding feast and to take on the role of one of the servants instructed to fill the jar. I imagined myself into the smells and the sounds of the joyous occasion. As I imagined myself into the smells and sounds, I moved through various emotions, from scepticism and disbelief to amazement and wonder. So as I poured the water into the jars, I thought to myself, what is this guy doing? Telling me to put water in jars? The guy must be crazy. And then, as the chief steward drew the wine out of the vat, I looked at it and he said it was beautiful wine. I thought, I was amazed. I said, "What? How did he do that? That's incredible." So as I reflected on that, I drew from the scene the lesson that if I did what Jesus was calling me to do in my own life, there was nothing that he could not achieve through me, even miraculous outcomes. I also concluded that it was important for me to discern what I was being called to do with my skills and experience. It was a significant moment in my spiritual journey and a testament to the power of Ignation imagination. So let's return to the theme of the readings. Who is our neighbour? In the first reading, the author uses the terms brother and sister in their broadest meaning and makes it clear that taking action by helping them is a requirement of abiding in God's love. To quote, "How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help?" The author reinforces this with the statement, "Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action." That statement reminds me of the statement attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, "Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words." And so with this call to action, let's examine the gospel story through imaginative prayer. Now this is where you get to do some work. I'm going to ask you to pay attention carefully to what I'm about to say. I want you to visualise the Good Samaritan parable as if you were making a movie. Pay attention to the details, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the smells, the feelings of the event. Lose yourself in the story. Don't worry if your imagination is running too wild. At some point, place yourself in the scene. Choose to be one of the 5 characters. The man beaten and bloodied on the roadside. The priest, the Levite, the Samaritan, or the innkeeper. Choose one of those. It doesn't particularly matter which one. When you've chosen a character, play the scene over in your imagination again. What do you see? What emotions stir within you? Do you experience any internal conflict? Sit with this for a while. I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Okay, let's come back to the room here. Now I'm going to create a little bit of chaos. I want you to pair up and turn to your neighbour and tell them which character you chose and what your imagination did with that character. You'll have about a minute each to share that. If you are uncomfortable sharing, just sit with them. Can we come back to the room again, please? All right, just back with me if we can, thanks. Yep. St. Ignatius was convinced that God speaks to us as surely through our imagination as through our thoughts and memories. In the Ignatian tradition, contemplation is a very active way of praying that engages the mind and heart and stirs up thoughts and emotions. So let's examine the gospel characters in more detail. We have Jews and Samaritans. They were enemies back in the time we're talking about. If you think about current day Jewish settlers and Palestinian farmers in the West Bank, you'll get the picture of what it was like for Jews and Samaritans back in Jesus' time. The victim of this bashing is a man travelling down from Jerusalem to Jericho. I don't know if any of you have been to Israel, but Jericho is right at the base of a mountain range. Jerusalem's on top of the hill. Right? So he's coming down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's a windy road. It's dangerous because there are lots of robbing groups that are on the road. The victim, so he's coming down the road. We don't really know anything else about him. We're introduced to a priest who is travelling down the same road. He sees the man but passes by on the other side. He feels under no obligation to assist the man because it is not at all clear that he is a neighbour towards whom he has obligations. Furthermore, it's possible that the man is dead and a priest was forbidden to pass within 2 metres of a corpse under pain of being considered ritually unclean. To investigate would mean running the risk. He might have to return to Jerusalem to buy and sacrifice a heifer. We are not surprised, really, that he avoids this risk and continues on his way. He can always claim to be scrupulously obeying God's injunctions. Next comes a Levite. He too is on his way from Jerusalem, having completed his cult obligations. These included pouring oil and wine on the offerings to prepare them for sacrifice. He sees the man. If the priest did nothing, why should he? Besides, there's not much that he can do. However, he had oil and wine with him, and so he could have brought some ease and comfort to the man. We could infer that he considered it easier to pour these on a sacrifice than to care for a neighbour. Anyone listening to Jesus would have expected the next character to be a Jewish layman, but here the story takes a sudden twist. He's a Samaritan. Travelling in Judean territory, he is in more danger than either the priest or the Levite. He also has more reason not to act, since it is more likely that the man by the side of the road was a Jew and so an enemy rather than a neighbour. Next, the Samaritan does what the priest could have and should have done, but failed to do. He put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. Then there's the innkeeper, probably a Jew and a businessman. Does he take the man in willingly? Should he trust the Samaritan to return and compensate him for additional expenses? We don't know. The main lesson of this wonderful parable is captured in the letter of James, chapter 2:17. So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. However, by using your imagination, there are lots of hidden meanings and additional lessons that can be revealed. For example, if you imagine that the characters represent not individuals but nation states, the parable takes on new meaning. If the beaten man is Sudan, torn apart by civil war, which nations would be the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan? Let me briefly describe another example of imaginative prayer. In 1992, renowned Dutch Catholic priest and author Henri Nouwen wrote The Return of the Prodigal Son after sitting for days staring at Rembrandt's painting of this well-known parable. His book is an extraordinary example of imaginative prayer. He encourages readers to progressively imagine themselves in each role, firstly as the prodigal son, then as the older brother, and then as the father. It may be helpful, if you were to do this yourself, to use 3 separate sessions to do this. Which of the 3 characters do you identify with most in that parable? I commend this practice and this book to you. To conclude, who then is your neighbour? How do you live your life in the spirit of Jesus' second great commandment? Use your imagination and live in to your own truth.